All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1,000,000 Relationships Podcast. Now, I got Yanik. I know we were talking before we hit the record button. This will be episode 175. And a year and a half ago, hosting a podcast wasn't even on my radar, man. And yet here it is now. And this has been one of the most rewarding things I've done in my 27-year entrepreneurial career. And this interview is one of those really cool interviews because Yanik, you and I, we go back a long dang ways, man.
Yeah, for sure. Almost all the way back to your 27 years of being an entrepreneur.
Yes, absolutely.
Not quite that far, but pretty far.
Yeah, because so I met Joe Polish in 96 was when I met Joe, and I met you 3 years later in 99 at one of Dan Kennedy's seminars, and Joe was at that event. And
I remember that.
Completely shocked. He's like, "My gosh, Kevin, you're one of the first carpet." He's like, "You are the first carpet cleaner that ever made it to a Dan Kennedy seminar." He was completely shocked to see me there. And I met you, and I met Perry Marshall at that event as well. And what's really cool is that, like, all these years later, man, I mean, like, look, well, for one, there's been a whole lot of water under the bridge since those days. And look at what's happened in all of our lives since those days. And these relationships are still intact.
I mean, I just went with we did a trip to Antarctica last year, and Perry came with us with our Maverick group to Antarctica. So
that's awesome.
We still are in touch. I'm in touch with Joe. Obviously in touch with you. So it's pretty amazing. Actually, that event, 99, I remember it really clearly because that was I'm pretty sure that was the first event I went to. And it was a lot of money for me at the time. It might've been $3,500. I don't know what it was, $4,000. And I was still working for my father, selling medical equipment. And then on the side, I was also selling my own. I had a small little publishing business, for dermatologists and maybe at that point cosmetic surgeons, like teaching them how to get more cosmetic patients.
Okay.
So following some of the model that Joe had been working on, Jeff Paul, a couple of the other guys, and I told my dad, I'm like, you think I should go to this? And Russian immigrant, he's like, Dad, you have so much money, maybe you just give it to me instead of going. And I'm like, well, okay, I think I'm going. And so, I think, and this is probably a good setup for what we're talking about, is I think your life changes in three ways. One, through the books and materials that you study and read and listen to, the people that you meet, and the experiences that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I know my focus I've had some pretty amazing experiences. I've read some pretty amazing stuff that has been life-changing, and relationships have absolutely been life-changing. And not only for me, but I've been able to facilitate a lot of that for other people that I just really love and care about and respect too, which is really cool, And I look back at that event in I don't know that I've ever shared this with you, Yanik, but that event and hearing because you had come out with instant sales letters at that time.
It was, I think, a tiny bit later than that. I might not even.
Was it later than that event?
I think 2000. Yeah, so maybe the next go round.
Okay. What I do know is that you were the one that got me thinking, wouldn't it be cool if, instead of just running my cleaning business locally, if I could somehow use the internet and have a broader reach, nationwide. Yeah. I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if I was even using the internet to communicate worldwide with people? And I ended up starting this ugliest website ever called I don't know. There was a lot of ugly websites. But started this ugly website called Get Mold Solutions as an extension of my cleaning.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
And we grew that business, and it was producing, 15,000 a month in revenue for the business and stuff. And so in 2003, Joe invited me to come down to his event. And because he used to host this annual event for the cleaning industry, he said, why don't you come down here and show everybody what you're doing with your website? And I was like, all right. And so he's like, and before you come, make sure to document what you do and how you do it, put it into a course, because a certain percentage of the people, they're going to want your help once they hear from you, and just make sure you're ready to give that to them. And we ended up selling $35,000 worth of that course. And I was like, wow. And that launched a whole new thing. The following year, April 19th of 2004, I sold the cleaning business. I moved into that full time. Over the next 12 years, we sold 16.1 million worth of that course. And granted, it got updated over the period. But
yeah,
I
that's pretty
also
good.
set I was setting the foundation for all the work that I do today, and build it, because we did almost 600 strategic partnerships in those 12 years. And I just created all these amazing relationships, you know. And so
That's pretty good.
Anyways, I didn't intend to talk, but I didn't know if you'd ever, I don't think I'd ever shared that with you. And
No, I love that. Yeah, it's these little moments, right? So, and they become these catalyzing moments that that really that create these amazing ripples of impact. And I love that. So
that's right.
Yeah, that's great.
So now I will stop talking about me. We'll shift back to you. And so I'll turn it over to you, Yanik, because I want you to be able to share, set a little context before we start getting into the relationship beast, but share a little bit about your background, what you're doing now, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you do, and we'll start there.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. I have to go all the way back, which is actually, I kind of mentioned working for my father. And so our family came over from Russia when I was 3 years old. A bit of a immigrant success story where my dad had maybe $256 in his pocket for me, my mom, my grandmother. He went to work at a local hospital, and basically there was an ultimatum by his boss that they were going to fire him, or he had to quit because he was doing some work moonlighting on the side, repairing medical equipment for other doctors for their private practices. And my dad did the path that all of us entrepreneurs take, which is that the potentially riskier path, but following your own, creating your own destiny really, and taking responsibility for what you're doing. And so I grew up working in a family business, which was medical equipment sales and service. And I say that as a background because I think it's really important, because at 14, I was telemarketing. I was calling on my own leads, selling latex gloves. At 16, the only way I got a car was I went out and cold called. And I had one doctor who I sold an entire surgery center to. We were friends. And so he gave me a Jay Abraham tape. He's like, you're kind of into this marketing stuff. I feel like you might like this. And is my dog too loud?
Nope.
Can you hear my dog?
Not at all.
Perfect. So gave me the Jay Abraham tape, and it just like turned my, just lit me up about like, holy cow, there's, I could actually write letters or put out ads and have people be interested in what I was doing instead of me cold calling them. And that really changed my life. So that was a relationship, with that doctor. His name was Nathan Way. He actually was a Dan Kennedy person as well. I don't know if you ever met him, Kevin. He'd been to a couple of events as well. He's a rheumatologist and really was into the marketing side of things. And so he gave me that Jay Abraham tape, and it just, again, like the material you study or the books you read, the people you meet, the experiences you have. So as I was 17 approximately, I've just been listening to this over and over again in my car, and it also helped. Like, I was just fascinated by this idea that you could put words on paper or whatever way it was, and have people take a particular action, either raise their hands and be like, yeah, I'm interested. And I only have to talk to 8, 9s, or 10s that are interested in my stuff I was selling, or even like give me money. And it just changed the whole paradigm. So I started writing these ads. I started getting more and more into copywriting. I'd be studying everything I possibly could. At this time, I was also listening to a lot of Earl Nightingale material. I don't know how I found him, but I loved his way. He really put words to my thinking, especially about like, if you want to be successful, just do the opposite of what most other people are doing. If you know that whatever you think about starts becoming a real thing for you, you know, that was his strangest secret. Even like things like, you know, if you want to become an expert in any topic, study or read for 1 hour a day for 3 years. If you want to become a world-class expert, study or read for 1 hour a day on that topic for 5 years. And I'm like, well, what would happen if you did it for 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day? And I was just, you know, again, enthralled by this idea of direct response, persuasion, influence, what could be done with it. And then I learned from people like Joe Sugarman and Ten Nicholas and of course Dan Kennedy at some point, but we'll save him for, there's a bigger part for Dan. And then I started, you know, using like Joe Sugarman as my model for his ads, because his ads were physical products, and I would be writing ads for EKG machines and I don't know, bone densitometers and you know, just all sorts of stuff, fetal Dopplers, like, you know, very, very complicated-esque material, but I'd be writing these full-page ads, and my dad look at them, he's like, who's gonna read all this? I'm like, okay, let's just try it and see. And we were getting really significant from a regional player to a national player by using uh Kevin, you still there?
I am there. I'm not sure what happened. I lost you, but I got you now.
Okay.
Hmm.
We're still good.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
let's
all
keep
right, all right.
going here. Let's
Yeah, I'll keep going. So, you know, from there, I started working with some doctors, and that was where I was doing consulting. And as a consultant, you get paid essentially by the hour. You know, there's some other ways too, but I'm like, okay, well, I'm pretty capped at that point. And that's when I ran into Dan Kennedy. I think I got a direct mail piece from Dan, and I'm like, ooh, I'm like, you know, at this point, you know, spending money on things was kind of out of my realm of, you know, I was nervous about spending that much money on a newsletter or other things. And then I saw this opportunity where at first I was going to like, you know, sell here's how to get more patients, but sell it for like $100 or $200 premium on the information that you're selling, especially if it's to a particular niche or marketplace. And again, like Joe Polish that we mentioned in '99, and Jeff Paul and a couple other people were starting to do this in, you know, maybe chiropractic and carpet cleaning and financial planning. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, there's a model here. And so I remember writing the letter. I wrote the letter first. It was about an 18, 20-page sales letter to sell the kit. I put out my first ad in Dermatologic Surgery News or something like that, Dermatologic Surgery Journal. And I got 10 leads. And you know, you talk about these little moments that really make a difference. And you know her, Heather Kruger. You know Heather, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
Heather's amazing. So at that point, she was working for Jeff Paul. And so I sent out the first letter, didn't get anyone to respond. I think I sent out the second one, nobody responded. I only had 10 leads, by the way. And so I call up the office and Heather's like, oh, honey, just mailed the third letter. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I mailed the third letter, which of course has a deadline that's starting to come up. And out through the fax machine, you hear right? Like, as you know, old school fax machine. Every time the fax, by the way, would ring at my dad's office because I was using his fax number, I'd be like running up there hoping that it was an order. And finally, there was one for $900. And it was like, you know, so exciting and so unbelievable, because when you finally see something become real, when
Yeah.
like something that you wrote, created, and then someone's willing to give you money for it, I'm like, this is amazing. And then I'm like, oh shit, I got to make this thing. And so I wrote back a letter to the person, to the doctor, saying, hey, this is being republished. It's gonna be available within 30 days. We're not going to charge your credit card until then. And then I got to work. I clocked out at 5 o'clock every single day, and got to work a lot of times till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, working on this kit, which became a small business that was generating $10,000-15,000 when I ended up leaving my dad's business. And so
Wow.
that was sort of that was sort of part one of maybe my story.
Wow. Wow.
That's when you and I met.
Yes. Yeah. And that is so, um, and I know that the instant sales letter product came out, but I want to skip ahead because you ended up hosting this series of events annually called the Underground, which was a very unique thing. And I'm sure that through doing that, I mean, that's what led to you doing so much more that ended up coming out of that. So talk a little bit about that and how that transpired.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned an instant sales letter. So at that point, way back, I didn't have an email, wasn't, but I started to see the internet was starting to work. And I'm like, okay, well, I've created a lot of marketing material for my father. I also did some consulting for the doctors and then a few other sort of clients that came to me. And I'm like, I love questions. And my question I posed to myself was, how do I create a fully automatic website that makes me money while I sleep and is an incredible value for people? And that's when I literally woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning with that idea for instant sales letters. So that became a hit. And then people were like, "Oh, how did you do that? Could you teach me how to, take my information or my content and sell it?" And then I just kind of followed that little path. And what I started seeing a couple years later was it was like the exact same people speaking on the exact same stages, all selling, here's how to make money online. And what they're doing was selling how to make money online stuff. And it was just like this sort of incestual-ish circle. And not they're not bad people, but it was just like I thought there could be a different way of approaching things. And I love, coming at things from a different way. And again, probably that goes back to the Earl Nightingale of like, if everyone's doing this thing, go this opposite way. And so the Underground was born with this concept of let's bring in real world people who you probably don't know who are doing really well online, and they're going to share what they're doing. And it was for more advanced students, entrepreneurs as well. So we'd have 200, 300, 400 people in the audience, as it grew. And I did that for about 10 years. And what's fascinating about that is it was a real experience. So it wasn't just an event. We spent $50,000 on stage just to create this unique design. And to have a unique theme every year. Is a different spy theme every year. It was, and we had celebrities that we bring in. We brought in a James Bond, an actor that played James Bond. I can't remember his name now. It was the guy that only played Bond 1 year because he's the cheapest Bond to get. I got the guy who played Mini-Me, Vern Troyer, 1 year. So we did like an Austin Powers one. So we did a lot of themes, a lot of experiences. And what's interesting, and I actually did write down Underground as we're talking about relationships, because I became the center of these relationships. And it's so amazing. I even had, 2 weeks ago, I was at an event speaking, and a guy came up to me. He's like, you changed my life through Underground. You don't even know it. I was there, twice, and this is what I'm doing now. But I've had so many people come up and be like, I met, this partner, or this thing started because of it. And they gave me credit for it, even though I never actually introduced them, but because the Underground was such a unique experience and event and container.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So I remember distinctly, I was there. Jesse Elder and I went together kind of to the Underground in 2013. I remember we were at that event.
That
And
was that New Orleans?
yes, that was in New
Yeah,
Orleans.
that was the last one.
And I Jesse and I got invited out to dinner one evening with a group of people. And I do remember David Gonzalez was there, and I ended up sitting right next to Glenn Ledwell at that dinner.
Yeah.
And
That's funny.
and as a result of sitting next to Glenn, and him just finding out what I was up to, we ended up striking up a partnership, and we became partners. And he promoted my thing, and I promoted some of his stuff, and then the very first event that I ever held in 2017, where I wanted to get these entrepreneurs together for the purpose of just facilitating these amazing relationships. And I had right on the other side of this wall in my living room, Glenn came to one of those events, and so he came to that
That's funny.
first event.
Yeah, I mean, so Glenn was, again, like that whole concept of unknown people like speaking or people that don't normally speak. Glenn, he'll tell you this. That was the first stage I'm pretty sure he spoke on. He had a flask of tequila, and I remember
That's
him
totally
going
good.
up there. And he was nervous, and a lot of times I have to like talk these speakers into presenting, and because that's not what they normally do, and so I'm like, check out your flask, and I'm like, yeah, it is tequila. And it's funny because I just saw Glenn 2 weeks ago, and Jesse actually at the event that I was mentioning,
Yep.
that guy came up. So it's funny how these circles keep interconnecting and circling back on each other.
That's right. That's right.
But
that's right. Well, okay, so I want to continue just a little bit further,
okay,
because I know I specifically want to get to where you get to share a little bit about the work that you guys have done, and how you got into collaborating and partnering with Richard on stuff, because I think that is just a really cool thing. And I got to experience one of those one time, which was really awesome. He had done a fundraiser out in Los Angeles one year. I can't remember what year, but Joe had to get together, and we all went to Richard's fundraiser that evening afterwards and stuff, which was a way.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the underground is actually a portion of this, because you see like little, I don't know, little seeds, little like hints as you go along. Even before the underground. So I did an event called my 30th birthday bash. I don't know if you ever remember that. Probably not, but it was so Dan Kennedy helped conceptualize this when we were in his, I don't know, platinum group together, and the rest of the mastermind members. And so my 30th birthday was coming up. I think the meeting was like in July or August. My birthday's in September, and I'm like, what should I do? And we're like, well, let's put on a unique event and experience a birthday party. And I'm like, that sounds great, but I'm not doing it in a month. That's not going to work. So we ended up doing it in January. And it was, I think, previous to that, it was the biggest internet marketing event to that time. And it was 500 people. And the only way in was I think a $50 donation to Make-A-Wish.
Okay.
And so it was a totally free event. Essentially, we raised $25,000 for Make-A-Wish. And then, I had some of my friends come over there, like Corey Rudel and Marlon Sanders, and, Jonathan Mizell, I think, was there. Some of the original interesting, internet marketing guys, and then just share what they were doing, Bill Glazer, put on a unique event. And that experience started coming up there because we had birthday cake, even though it was sliced like, an inch thin, because there's so many people, and just all sorts of stuff. But it was really, it was quite fun. And Dan actually had this idea for a gag gift contest. I'm turning 50 this year. Maybe I'll bring it back in some way. But we had people. I had a guy show up with his dog, his basset hound, to sing "Happy Birthday" to me. I had this guy from the UK who thought it was more like a stag party, and brought all sorts of random things for my birthday present. But it was quite a bit of fun, and that experience. But then also the charity aspect, and then that continued with Underground, because we did something unique where I said, we're going to incentivize these speakers a $10,000 charity check for whoever gets voted the best usable information.
Okay.
So that, so you start seeing these little seeds, these little hints. And so the value alignment, which ultimately ended up us doing, a lot of work now with Richard, is the value alignment turned into something called Maverick. So about 14 years ago, I asked a really simple question, which isn't that simple, but it was, am I happy? Would I be happy doing what I'm doing 10 years from now? And in my journal, that, when I really reflected, the answer was no. I was making a lot of money, helping a lot of people. I couldn't go anywhere. So someone's being like, "Oh my God, you changed my life. I sell guitar lessons online now," or something like that. And that was amazing, but it felt like there's something more that I could be doing. And so it really came down to, let's bring together amazing entrepreneurs, and let's have business sessions in the middle of nowhere, some sort of adventure that we're doing. We'll have some fun together and have a charity element. So those three things, they've now sort of continued evolving to, we call it growth, impact, and fun. So growing yourself, growing your business, making an impact individually in your company, and then collectively using our brain power, and then having some fun together. And so those sort of three values really lined up with some of the people that I've continued to meet, like these icons and celebrities. And so Joe Polish was actually instrumental in this originally. So Joe, obviously, a big part of your story as well. So Joe and I have been friends quite a while. He had met Richard, who Richard has been always, one of my biggest business heroes because of the way he lives his life, having interest in 300 some companies, his adventurous streak, the way that he also brings world leaders together to make a difference. And so Joe had met Richard at a charity event and got his email, and then ended up, I guess, pitching him this idea of bringing people to Necker Island for an entrepreneurial, retreat getaway. And so I ended up paying to go. And because sometimes, you do want to pay to play sometimes and be in these kind of rooms and situations. There's other ways too that you can get yourself into these spots, but sometimes you're going to shortcut it and get in there. And so I was super excited and had a great time. And then at the end of the week, Joe's like, well, that was great. And I'm like, yeah, it was awesome. You want to do it again? And he's like, I don't think I can fill it. So I'm like, well, why don't you and I split the island? And so what ended up happening was we split the island for a couple of years. And that's how grew this relationship with Richard by being there, by bringing some of our Maverick members there. And then Joe would bring some of the 25K members. And then a couple of years later, it wasn't something that I think Joe absolutely loved. And then we loved it. Like my family's there, they absolutely love it. And we're like, well, I think we're just going to, take it over and just run it and make it even more of the experience that we want, especially even more so around the impact side and the experience side, and just really, really do what we want with that. But really it's a values alignment around, around that, these global issues around entrepreneurship being ways of creating leverage to make a difference. And I think that's what you asked way earlier, like what drives you. And that to me is the biggest thing. It's like, how do we make a difference through entrepreneurship, through business? So I think business can be the greatest lever for making a difference. And so these very high level retreats like this on Necker, but then also the other stuff that we do is all around that. Like, how do we use business as that difference maker?
Yeah. I was that fundraiser that Richard and Virgin Unite had in LA that I got to attend that one evening. And I can't remember what his goal was for the evening, but he had a financial goal of how much money they wanted to raise, and they had shared that goal. And after dinner and before they started the auction, Richard ended up taking the stage and got up to the podium and told a story of what had just happened. That one person and it was, Richard was visibly moved by this experience, but one person had come to him and handed him a check that surpassed what their goal even was for the evening. And he's like, so we've already achieved this, and yet this person insisted that I not name them. They don't want to be known who they were. And I'm just thinking like, wow, what a cool experience. What an amazing thing. And the whole auction thing was really cool. They auctioned off a bunch of cool stuff, and it was just,
I remember you could get a plane named after you or something like that. I think Dean Graziosi that.
And I'm just like, wow, what a cool thing when you get like-minded entrepreneurs who want to make an impact and who are just resourceful that way and stuff. And it was amazing to witness. And that, I think, that was a big part that planted a seed for me, that I'm like, man, a lot of entrepreneurs. And I mean, things were starting to just percolate in my mind, and just starting to come, like what you shared, just come up. They started getting me thinking about stuff, and that like kind of paved the way to everything that's been going on now. And in many ways, this podcast, And so, yeah, that is like really cool. And and like you guys have, I mean, accomplished so much over the years, and I know, just you and I reconnect, and find out that my friend John was just on Necker with you guys recently. He was telling me, he's like, yeah, I just got home from a trip to Necker, and I'm like, oh, you were obviously there with Yanik in there, and so well, okay, so we've got some really cool context. In fact, I don't think in all the interviews I've done, we haven't spent that much time. But I mean, that was fascinating, Yannick, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share all that. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of listeners, and we're going to shift gears here just a little bit. So, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Yannick, I'm just like really excited to hear your story and your experience around the most valuable relationships in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we started talking about some of them already. So many there. I almost look at them as different eras of my life, and so I think Dan Kennedy was one of those huge influences that really helped me realize about selling information and content and how to do things differently, and so deep in his world, that major influence. I mean, for sure, got me to become a millionaire. I think at such an early age. I had a goal to be a millionaire by 30, reached it at 30, 31. And I think a big part of that, Dan is probably one of the top three people that helped influence that for sure. Probably Earl Nightingale and Ted Nicholas would be the others. And it's, I guess he introduced me to himself via the direct mail piece, but it was completely life-changing. And it's one of those relationships that had so many other ripples of impact, as you and I met there, and other people that have become part of my life. I think another era is maybe the philanthropic side, and one of them that I was mentioning before we got on the recording was a guy named Frank McKinney, and Frank is originally like a real estate. He'd call himself a real estate artist. He'd build really big mansions on spec, $10 million, $20 million on spec, waiting for one buyer. And so when I heard his story, one of my friends, actually, Mike Lippman, introduced me to his book. Mike, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So Mike introduced me to his book, as the original one, like Thinking Big, or and I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating. I'm like, I'd love to meet this guy, because there's a values alignment. That's how I really think about people that I want to connect with, as well as like what's the values alignment. And his was so deep about the charity philanthropic side. He actually calls it philanthrocapitalism. It's like using all your capitalistic tendencies to make a difference and connect it together. And he had been doing a lot of work in Haiti, building these self-sustaining villages. And so this is actually, I don't think he really did very much of this. He didn't need to do it at all, but he had an event going on in Florida, and there was a ticket opportunity where you could buy a spot at his house. And, again, another pay to play kind of opportunity. I'm like, okay. I mean, obviously, I'm going to get a chance to really meet him in this opportunity then. So I bought a spot. It's like in his little guest pool house, and I lived there for 2 or 3 nights for the event. And it was really funny. I got a chance. I can't remember if this is this seminar or maybe another one, but I think it was this one. I got a chance to hang out and meet his brother. And his brother and I were partying. This is back when I would party quite a bit. Not anymore. It's not really part of my life. And we were out till 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, hanging out. And Frank would get up at 5 o'clock to go running, or 4:30 in the morning to go running every morning. And so Bob, his brother's living at the house too. We're coming back, and Frank's like, "All right, well, I'll see you boys. I'm off for my run." I'm like, well, maybe I'll come with you. Like when, and so we were literally passing it. I'm like, all right, let me go get my shoes on. And I get up and go running with him. And so Frank still remembers that story. He loves it. And, I ended up also, there was an auction there, and ended up, buying some paintings there, and buying a house, that I paid for, I think, 3 houses in Haiti. And then we had the opportunity to actually jointly put on some events in Haiti where we brought Maverick members. So kind of similar, where we started bringing people there and creating these joint events. And then finally it ended up being, he gave me this incredible honor where they built a village in Haiti and named it the Yanik Silver Maverick Village, and it's quite an honor. But there's these, again, these relationships that really change your life in so many ways. And again, these eras, right? And I think it's values based. It's aligning in that way. The Branson was kind of funny too, we mentioned, but I have a life list. I had one. I don't really follow it anymore, but I had this thing called the ultimate life list, and I'd have things that you want to do, things that you want to have, maybe people you want to meet, experiences you want to have, etc. And one of them for sure was I wrote have lunch with Richard Branson. And it's funny when it works out in the right way. Like, I have this little thing, this little plaque on my desk that I actually wrote on Necker, and it says, "Trust the universe has even more in store for you than you can imagine." There's a bit more to it as well, but it's that was my imagination at that point, right? Like, have lunch with Richard, and now it's been probably 50 lunches, 60 lunches.
Right.
I have no idea. And so, like, again, when I think there's something about like what you really want when you move towards it, and that's also moving towards you when it's aligned with what it's meant to be.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Yeah. So I want to, I love asking this follow-up question, because you have had, a lot of relationships in your life. You've had these key relationships like you've talked about, Dan and Richard and Frank,
Yep. And Joe was a catalyst for
yeah. And if you look, back over your life, and because there could be there would be so many examples of this, but I just know one is going to pop up when I ask this. And so if you look at the relationships that you've had over your life, and where one of them allowed you to make this really huge impact in the world that hands down would have never happened if not for your relationship with that person. And I'm just really curious to hear an example that just comes up for you for that.
it's funny, it's two people. One would be my mom.
Okay.
It's interesting because so my mom was passed now about 17, 18 years ago now. And when there's been this study for successful people, and it's like that they couldn't find anything in common except for at least one person in their world was sort of an unconditional cheerleader for them. And that was my mom for me, for sure. Like, she had no idea what I was doing, especially in the internet world and all these things, but she was just, she was just really excited and knew that, no matter what it was that I could do it and figure it out. And she was just really happy for me in that part. So she comes to mind. And then also my fourth grade teacher, and she was also my sixth grade teacher, who kind of started seeing these little, these weird qualities in me, these, maybe different ways of being and thinking. And she helped encourage that. And it's funny, is many years ago, maybe at least 10 years ago or so, I wrote her a thank you note. And that's one of the most powerful things you can do with these relationships, change your life, is you write a handwritten note to them. And she, I tracked her down via Facebook and got her address, and she was just so blown away, because you never know the ripples of impact that you have on somebody. And so if you can just give that gift to them, that reflection, it's so powerful. And it was absolutely so meaningful for me to write that to her and then connect to her in that way. And she absolutely remembers. She's like, yeah, you were one of those absolute, I forget the words that she used, but highlights or stars or something that really stood out. And it's there's these meaningful opportunities, and you never quite know. Like, I've coached my son's hockey team since he was 5 or 6. And, I'm hopeful that maybe there's one kid in there that something, shifted and changed. And I did actually get a thank you note from one of them, I think last year, the season before. And all those little moments, you just don't quite know, but
Yeah.
relationships are so key.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I really appreciate you sharing it. I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today, Yanik. For anybody listening, that is like, man, Kevin, I really like Yanik. I love the way he shows up. How can they find out more about some of the stuff you guys are doing and working on? Any resources or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. If they're, if you're a 7, 8, 9-figure entrepreneur, we run a group called Maverick 1000. So that's at maverick1000.com, that we do the unique adventures and retreats and experiences that combine that growth, impact, and fun. The other way is the book I wrote a couple of years ago, called Evolved Enterprise. And that's a really great primer on how do we create impact in our business that actually drives more revenue, gets more customers to want to buy and become zealots for what we're doing. It gets, you build a community with that. You really have new partnerships and relationships that open up because of the impact and mission that you have through your business. And then if they want a fun one, my most recent release is called the Cosmic Journal. And it's basically, I call it the galactic instruction manual you were missing when you were born to fulfill your destiny here.
Very cool. Very cool. I'll make sure we include that with the show notes and stuff. Well, Yannick, I want to thank you again for taking the time to have this conversation and just share, from your heart, and share, because, my goal has always been is for the listeners, is that, just through hearing what's discussed in this interview series, that they're just inspired to place an intentional focus on creating more meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own life. And we've definitely delivered on that today. And I want to just thank you, Yanik, for your role in that. And any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
Not really. Actually, there's one thing, and I learned this from a guy named David Homan, Homan. He runs something called Orchestrated Connections. And he had this new thing that I really love, which was honor the chain. And that's the notion of like when you get introduced to someone, to really go back to them and honor, like, all right, what happened, or so that they know, what were those ripples of impact, what especially if you're a person that loves connecting others and so forth, and it just helps whoever you're building relationships with. It just helps them also know, like, what went on, that you honor them, that you value them. And so, I even, relationships have been one of the core ways that I've done pretty much everything in my world. And I still continue learning new ways of honoring those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Yannick, thanks again for taking the time to have this conversation. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it was fun.